So, theory of inquiry, experimentation, reflection, and revision. And logic is not about immutable rules, but about habits of inquiry grounded in real-world contexts. By the way, something that I didn't mention with Charles Sanders Peirce is Charles Sanders Peirce gave us, besides induction and deduction, the connecting link is abduction. So I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but abduction is essentially accumulating your inductive reasoning process, adding to your database, using deduction in order to analyze it, but then using more induction in order to put it all together. So the whole process is referred to as abduction. Let me go back up. So democracy is a way of life. I mentioned that for all the pragmatists, democracy was a very important priority for all of them. So they're all associated with this as a principle, and it's in a sense freedom instead of an autocracy, which we might be moving into now. But if what we have is a democracy, there's more dialogue between all the different individuals involved, right? It certainly works at a local level. If you've been to different, community gatherings and so on, a lot of them are on the news lately because, of course, a lot of politicians are getting yelled at from their the members of their communities, because a lot of things are bothering people, of course, with the way things are going, etc. So you can see images of a lot of people all yelling and screaming at one another. I watched Marjorie Taylor Greene at a local gathering saying, "This is a very peaceful meeting," while over where the camera was focused on, the police are all tasing someone who wasn't being very peaceful. I thought, that's irony, isn't it? Saying this is a very peaceful meeting, bzz, bzz, tasing, bzz, I can't breathe. Sorry, but that was said, right? That happened. So, we've got it embedded in our culture that people will have a say in what's going on and show up at meetings in order to argue over these things. And then it moves up levels and so on. When you compare that to other things like Russia, when it was still a serf society, no one believed that they had any right to get involved in politics or anything. And you imagine trying to actually teach individuals to be Democrats or democratic, right? I remember when Rory Stewart by the way, Rory Stewart did visit UAA years ago, plugging his book. But this is the book, The Places in Between. What he did was he went to Afghanistan. This was after the U.S. Soldiers attacked and destroyed certain Taliban groups. But meanwhile, Rory Stewart, who is Scottish, arrived. He does speak Farsi, and he started walking at one side of the country and walked all the way across Afghanistan to Kabul by himself, although part of the time he had a dog with him. It was a local dog. Dogs are not respected in Afghanistan, apparently, and he found this one particular dog with no teeth, to basically be in need of a companion, and he needed a companion, and the dog actually helped save his life at a couple points in the snow where he basically gave up, but the dog wouldn't let him give up. So kind of an interesting story. So interesting book to read. But part of what's going on is he was in a village right when an American helicopter landed, and this is all local people, all of whom speak Farsi, all of whom are shepherds, rural Afghanis, right? And the helicopter landed, they set up loudspeakers and a podium and so on, and an American politician got out and gave a lecture to all the people that you're a democracy now, and you all have freedom, and you can vote, and run for office and so on. And Rory was there, listening to the speech and aware that not a single other soul in the crowd understood English. And none of them, of course, had been raised bottom up to be part of a democracy. It was absolutely, it was an opportunity for the cameras to make it look like an American politician was talking to this crowd, which was totally ridiculous, right? So you can't just impose a bottom-up democracy on a society that hasn't had the opportunity to do that yet. The perfect explanation of this is Fukuyama, and that's well, which book do we want? Gosh, there's so many. Let's take a look at his different ones. He's on my list, by the way, of philosophers. He's still alive. The book that made him famous was The End of History and the Last Man. This is a Hegelian book. Essentially, the end of history. The end of history is what's the goal of history? Does history have a goal? From Hegel's point of view, the goal of history seems to be freedom. And remember, I updated that a little bit by arguing that it also might include entropy. Because as systems collapse, they're essentially freer. Right? And human beings seem to be helping systems collapse. Thank you, industry and all the things that are turning the planet into a collapsing system, right? Might have done this before, various, heat, cold heat, ice ages, etc. In any case, End of History, The Last Man, basically written right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, so it seemed like every country in the world would become a democracy and a capitalist society, so that you would end up with capitalism on the one hand as the way that it's free market capitalism, whatever that means, right? And at the same time, we're all democracies. And that would be the template. So basically, every other society would try to emulate the United States as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in fact, for quite a few years, a lot of countries did do this, and what we saw was the growth of democracies all over the place. But at the same time, they all started to fail. And why did they start to fail? Well, precisely because of the fact that The Origins of Political Order, which are two books. Notice the first one is The Origins of Political Order, which starts way back in early history, and talks about how politics got started and so on. But then since Napoleon and on, what we've been seeing is more of an age of revolutions, and that's political decay, essentially, if you think about it. America at the Crossroads. This book came out when the neocons, the neoconservatives, yes? You familiar with that idea? The neocons were the ones that were, let's bomb the hell out of the Middle East, etc. And that was at the point where he was critical of the neocons, and divorced himself essentially from their point of view, liberalism and its discontents, how problematic everything has become, etc. But the main thing that you have to realize is that in order to have a democracy, you have to have generations of kids being educated to realize that they have a self and that they have rights and that they should participate in politics and so on. You can't just impose a democracy on top of a society. You have to work it up from the bottom. And one of his books was really much better associated with that. Here we go. State building would be part of that. Our Post-Human Future was an interesting book. That's not so much politics, but the idea that our technologies were changing the nature of the human being. Biotechnologies, what kinds of things are, I mean, I'm thinking of Elon Musk's, how many kids does he have now? 13 as far as we know?
I think 14.
14 is it?
Yeah, he has a lot of them.
But they're all genetically enhanced, I guess, because, they were Petri dish fertilizations. He didn't actually make them the old-fashioned way. He has a group of wives that have volunteered for this. He keeps them all on a farm in Texas, except for the one. The one refuses. I understand. One of the older wives. Maybe that one was, I don't know. But in any case, no, he's using technology to create X. And I don't know what the other kid's name. Anybody know the kid's name?
What are they? They have like Exa Dark Citarail or something. Yeah. I think his oldest one is like a trans woman named like Vivian.
Yeah, that was an interesting issue, because he's kind of separated from that one. I didn't know which pronoun to use there.
Tau, Nevada, Griffin, Vivian, Kai, Saxon, Damien, XAE, Strider, Azure, Exa, and Arcadia. Or Sheldon.
Strider, that's from the Lord of the Rings. That was one of Aragon of Aragon's names. You could tell he's into sci-fi and fantasy.
13.
Okay. So that's the kind of thing that book was about, or Post-Human Future, America at the Crossroads. After the neocons, where the right went wrong. I haven't read that one. Identity. This is one of the most recent ones. Very small book. The whole issue of once you're a self and you have a self and you think of yourself as a self, what do you do with yourself? That's very, very interesting. So he's cool. One of my favorites. Perfect example of John Dewey's democracy, as a contemporary. So have a look at John Dewey. Pretty interesting. Lots of kids. He traveled a lot. He had a lot of influence. That one little video talked about his influence on China, but he also traveled to Europe. Lev Tolstoy sent a messenger to Dewey to ask him questions, because he was interested in it. And that leads me really to my next step here, and that is to refer to Wittgenstein. Ludwig Wittgenstein. Now, obviously, he's not an American. He's a Viennese. Grew up 1889. Died in my birth year, actually. So that's interesting. Dewey died in 1952, so that's kind of interesting. And Dewey was much older, 90-something. Wittgenstein died of cancer, throat cancer, at a relative 62. But so Wittgenstein is born. His father is one of the richest, if not the richest men in Europe at the time. It was a Jewish family actually, but they had converted to Christianity. It's kind of like Marx's family. Richest, their money was made in metals, in refining metals, and in weapons. And they were very rich as a result of all the weapons being purchased for World War I. And when World War I was done, they were actually richer because they sold weapons to both sides. And that infuriated Wittgenstein, by the way. And when he inherited his money, the father died and split the wealth among them all. And he took his money and he gave it to his sister. He didn't want it, which is kind of interesting. But I think his sister funded his living expenses in England, so he was still taken care of, even though he gave up all his money. Clearly autistic. He was clearly an autistic individual. And I have a, you know what, I might be able to use, let me double check here. It might have the picture. Let's click on the pictures real quick and go through them. Karl Wittgenstein, his father, the family home, they were very rich, had lots of musician friends, so there was lots of concerts in their house. And this is the interesting picture I was looking for. Notice you've got Wittgenstein right here, and this is the young Adolf Hitler. They both went to the same school, Realschule, in 1901. So that's kind of interesting. I put them together like that. Let's get back to here. So he's